Hey, it's Richard here from the Experiment Nation podcast. Today I've got Alun Lucas on the line. Alun's from Zuko.io. They're a form analytics company, and today we're going to cover why good form design is important but often overlooked, common myths with form optimization, and lastly, form design analytic basics. So stay tuned. Hi, it's Richard here from Experiment Nation, and today I've got Alun Lucas on the line, and Alun is the director of Zuko Form Analytics. Zuko is a form analytics software that CROs can use on the experimentation program. Now we all know that forms aren't the most sexiest thing on the planet, and it's not something that we naturally gravitate towards, but however, forms are very important for conversions, specifically in the funnel. And take it away. Welcome, Alan, to the podcast.
Hi, Richard. Hi.
Nice to meet you. You've been with Zerko for how long was it? Was it 2
I've
years?
been with Zuko 2 years, just over 2 years now.
Cool. And so obviously they do form analytics. It's a huge need. I think there aren't that many form analytics brands around there. I didn't know that Hotjar had it at one stage, and then
Yeah,
they had it embedded in their platform. Then they got rid of it for some reason.
yeah, mhm,
Um, so yeah, there's definitely a dire need for it, and I think it's something that many people in experimentation and CRO specifically don't always ignore. It's very easy to go for their sexy landing page redesigns or the A/B testing
yeah,
stuff, and just relying on their normal analytics tools like GA and other things, but maybe ignore things like forms.
yeah.
So yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic with forms and the relationship that that many optimizers have. Because, like you say, it's not always seen as sexy. Not necessarily by the optimizers themselves, but by the broader company. It's easier to look at, okay, how do we refresh the homepage, or how do we split test an advertising campaign and spend the time on that. I think it's an issue that comes from probably pre online days. That back in the day when you used to fill out a form, it'd be a
Mm,
big sheet of paper with 50 questions on. And so when the first websites came out, they just said, okay, well, we'll just translate that on there. So we'll just put the same form we've always been using onto a website. And obviously, it was bad user experience pre-digital, and it became bad user experience in the digital age. And it's not really moved on much. I mean, to be fair, in the past 10 years, it's got a bit better because there's been more attention on it, but still, it seems that it's not at the top of everyone's mind when it comes to an optimization project, which is
mm,
is from our perspective a little crazy because it's the sharp end of your funnel. It's
yep.
as any optimization, you're spending millions driving people to your website. You get them there. You spend a lot of time converting, doing your tests on what motivates them to move to the next step in the funnel. But then you get to the sharp end, the form, which is where people actually part their personal data or their financial data. So
Mm,
it's the most sensitive area, and people aren't spending as much time really understanding the form. There's almost like a black box approach. So it's like, okay, I know how many people arrive there from GA. I know how many people complete, and I know how many people drop out somewhere, but you don't really know where it is. And now, some people do hack around with GA and build some sort of jerry rigged thing where you can track some level of interaction within the form, but it
yep.
takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it's painful. If you make a change to the form, you've got to go away and do the whole process, which is why sort of at Zuko we built it to be super easy. Just a couple of tags, and it changes for you and tracks everything. So it's but I say it is frustrating that kind of lack of focus on forms.
And do you find that that's because, I myself, as an experimentation expert, well, not an expert, but I'm trying to be.
Yeah,
I'm naturally gravitated towards paid PPC,
yeah,
A/B testing on
yeah,
landing pages and other sort of things. And forms is like it's kind of something I know it's important, and I know like that's where the real money's made is, hey, them filling out the form and
Yeah.
submitting a lead or making a final purchase on an e-com store. But I don't know, it's just not the sort of thing that comes to mind when it comes to optimizing. Forms are associated with
Yeah.
school or
Yeah.
going to a medical clinic and having to
Yeah.
fill up, you know, 5 forms. It's not the sort of thing, and I think it's why what I personally associate it with not being sexy, because it's associated with, school and exams and
Yeah.
anything to do with administration.
Yeah, and I think that is part of the issue, it also sometimes it becomes formulaic. People assume the formula's been solved because it's been
Yeah.
around since pre-digital days. Why do I need to spend time improving this? Particularly if it's a relatively simple form, or e-commerce checkout's a classic example. It's like, oh, everyone does it like this, so let's just keep it like this. So I think there's that element of it. It's only we find there's certain clients that really get it, and financial sector is one of these because they live and die by their forms. When you're applying for a mortgage or a credit card, they're asking for all sorts of personal information. They've got regulatory requirements, so it's crucial that you're not unnecessarily scaring people off, and having the data to do that is absolutely critical.
And what are the sub like common issues you find with form design that you see in the
Yeah.
marketing with your clients that you serve?
Yeah, so the common issues, well, there's all sorts of different levels. I suppose it's kind of the first issue comes sort of from way back from the full design phase of the form, and it's often comes because people are thinking about the business's needs, not the end user.
Yeah.
So they'll sit in a room with marketing, digital, compliance, legal, security, and they'll work out what questions do we need to ask the user. And marketing will say, oh, we need to ask about their lifestyle, their hobbies, and legal and compliance say, oh, we must make sure they've answered this question, and all that sort of stuff. And so you end up with a Frankenstein's monster of a form. You're asking all sorts of things you don't really need to ask at the first
Mm.
stage. Um, so and it's designed, say, again, going back to what we talked about before, someone's like, oh, put the question in there. Let's not think about how we ask it or what the validation is. People just put it in there because, hey, it's just a question. On its own, you just look at one question and go, that's simple. It's, the person should be able to answer this question.
Mm.
They've got a driver's license. They can go and find it and put the number in. It's easy. And on its own, you think, well, maybe it is easy if they wanted to give you that information, but actually don't think, does the customer want to give you that information at this stage? You've only just met them, as it were, digitally, and you're asking for their phone number, their driver's license details, or whatever your form requires. It's like, okay, well, no one takes a step back and says, well, actually, do we need that now? Can we capture the lead, get us enough information to progress to the next stage, and then we can always go in and ask for additional information if it's critical for compliance purposes or whatever you might need it for. Or do you even need that information at all? And often the answer is no. So actually, why are you asking for it? So say that's probably the sort of high level stuff that you see. In terms of an issue with the design is that sort of big picture mistakes, which can manifest itself in lots of different ways. Other common issues we see is lack of attention to the mobile experience.
Yeah.
So mobile obviously is a very different environment, as as any optimizer knows, and often in organizations, if they don't have that culture of testing and experimentation, what we'll find is that they've just almost repurposed the desktop form for mobile.
Yeah.
And obviously in many sectors, they get a lot of traffic through mobile. So you'll find all sorts of issues, as well as the classic keyboard issue where you wanting a phone number and you click in and your letters come up. That's a classic
Yeah. The
issue you see all the
thick
time.
thumbs issue.
Yeah,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah. But then things like they're using drop downs, which drop downs are generally pretty horrible anyway. So you have a list of countries. You've got like 200 countries. It's terrible on desktop, but on mobile it's even worse because you're trying to, you've only got a very small portion of the drop down, and you're going down and up and down, and that's another classic example of issues they find, because it's great when you start digging into data, and we do, and obviously we're form geeks. You find just subtle things about mobile users and desktop users and how they differ. Interestingly enough, I was looking at one last week, which was around the discount code field on an e-commerce checkout.
Yeah.
So obviously that's always one we see a lot high percentage of dropouts, with the hypothesis being that people see a discount code right in the flow, they run off and try and find.
I've literally gone like half an hour at least off of those, and googling for name cheap promo codes, and going to different spammy sites, and it's very frustrating and very e-commerce CRO perspective. I mean, it's just probably a nightmare to have.
Yeah, exactly. And the interesting thing in this case is, say, we did obviously you usually see that big dropout, but what we did was we segmented mobile and desktop users, and it was very interesting that the different behavior. So what we found was one of the metrics we can look at is field returns, so people going away, coming back, changing stuff. Which obviously you'd find in a discount code because people are trying codes and seeing if they get rejected. And what we found that was in the case of desktop users, that was they did it 3 or 4 times on average, and it was only about 1.5 times for mobile users. Now, usually when we look at field returns, that's often an indication of user frustration because they're trying to do something, they're submitting, they have to go back to change it. I'm like, okay. And it may well, obviously, of course, frustration. But what we also found was when we looked at the abandonment rates on that field, so the people, which is sort of defined as in the proportion of people who abandoned, that was their last interaction, divided by the total number of people who ever interacted with the field, was actually much lower on desktop. So it was, it was still 10, 15%. But on mobile, it was like 30 plus. So what was happening was the desktop people were able to, they're seeing the field, and they would then pop off and do a lot of searching and keep bopping back and forth. But that meant they were more likely to convert, probably because they found a code. Because it was just easier. Whereas in mobile, they were much less likely, possibly because they see it and go, I see the code. And obviously the hypothesis is that in the mobile environment, it's much harder for them to be able to jump quickly. You're not just opening up a browser window and doing one mouse click in between. It's like, it's just a faff, and you're like, okay, I'll leave it till later. So they were dropping out in much higher rates. So actually, those sort of subtleties, that's just one example, but it's, as I say, companies don't take into consideration the mobile, not just the interface, but the experience of the person at that time. Are they, they're going to be out and about? Are they going to have an inferior connection? So they, if you've got a form that's going to take a long time to load, if they've got a poor connection, then it's going to be a much worse experience. Those sort of things they don't take into consideration much at all.
Yeah, I think what you said about the form design being a sort of a carryover from pre-internet age, where you had this 5-page document that you fill out at the dental clinic, and then people were just like, oh, well, we've got these forms, we've got the internet now, let's just code this on HTML and just transpose the same sort of thinking onto a website. And I must admit, like even today, I still see, well, on some like older websites, I still see like the desktop form on the mobile. It's like it's miniaturized like this, and the form fields are like the size of a little needle, and it's terrible.
I had a horrible experience last year when we obviously were still COVID restrictions. We went to Italy, one particular region in Italy, and we'd filled out online all the UK government and Italian government forms. But then we were told in the airport that actually the particular region you had to fill out a form as well. So we were in the airport queuing up for the plane, trying to fill this out before we got on the plane to Italy, and it literally was pure desktop. So trying to zoom in and get
Yeah.
onto one of the drop downs and it was all in Italian as well, so obviously
Oh
double stress. So you're
gosh.
trying to work out what was what, and eventually managed to do it. But luckily my fingers just about managed to poke the box, put in the text boxes and do that. So
Oh
yes,
yeah.
you certainly still get that a lot.
Yeah, I know what it's like. And look, I'm just moving on to so we talked about common issues with form
Yeah.
design. Obviously, once
Mhm.
you've experienced some of the issues, then
Yeah.
you need to go about optimizing things. So,
Mhm.
what are some good kind of form design tips and practices that a company should start heading out from the gate when they launch their website?
Yeah. Well, obviously, I say nothing's absolute and everything should be tested, but there are some
Yeah,
common themes that we see, both in terms of what you can be doing and also sort of processes as to where to look, where your issues might be. For one thing, I would always say, and this is not so much about a design tip, but just, okay, get your ideation for your test, is actually you want to look at the behavior around submit buttons on forms, because what you'll tend to find is you get there's a segment of your users which will spend the time filling out the form, click the submit button, but not successfully convert. And often these are the most valuable customers to you because they're ready to give you their data, they're ready to give you to buy from you, but something is stopping them. And so what you find is if you look at what the behavior is around the submit button, you can quickly identify where the biggest points of friction are. So you'll see they submit, they will jump back to one or two fields often, try to fix it, but then drop out. So you can just see, literally watch that behavior if you've got a tool that allows you to do it, and you can see them. Okay, right, yeah, can't fix it, gone, and it'll very quickly get you to your biggest issues. So that's often a great technique if you're limited in time or just want to get a quick insight. You can see often it's driven by error messaging. These are the error
yeah.
messages that trigger. Okay, right, I'm gone. I can't fix this, or I tried to fix it twice, but you're validating my phone number in a weird way. You're not letting me put spaces in or whatever it may be, and I've dropped out because of the bad experience.
And what tool do you recommend for that? I mean, um, I believe your tool is just purely the actual analytics. So in terms of user behavior and watching a recording, I'm guessing Hotjar, Lucky Orange.
Yeah,
Um,
you can use those. You can actually use Zuko if you want to. Obviously, we don't have session recordings, but we do
yeah.
have Session Explorer, so you can see the sessions, you can see how people are jumping, and also we have a flow, so you can actually do it in aggregate very quickly. So
Okay.
what
Is
you
that
can
like
do
is that
is,
like Google Analytics? Sorry to interrupt.
yeah, like
Is it like Google Analytics flow
yeah,
analytics where it shows like users went to this stage of the funnel, then they dropped off here, then went to this stage,
yeah,
and then so forth and so
exactly.
forth.
So you would just set on the submit button. You would choose an audience segment of people who dropped out, or
Yeah.
who abandoned, and then you'd see, okay, your audience segment. You select the submit button and say, okay, what happens next? Okay, they jump back to the email field or the phone number field in much greater numbers than anywhere else. So that basically tells you it quickly. So obviously I'm biased, so I would recommend that to do it quickly. But obviously, yeah, there are session replay tools out there if you want to see them do that as well.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I've used things like Hotjar and
yeah,
it's Mouse Flow, and it's funny seeing I've used it on forms analysis,
yeah,
and seeing people go crazy doing rage clicks
yeah,
on
yeah,
buttons that don't work, or
yeah,
there's a funny drop down, like for instance, like you said on mobile, and just going back to some of the common issues is,
yeah,
um, yeah, one of the things that I heard you saying was that webinar that you guys did. It was either
yeah.
you or that like guy. This he had a really strong Scottish accent, but
Oh,
he
Craig,
was
yeah,
yeah yeah he was going through some of the sort of common issues, and he said
mm,
one of the main things is yeah, like you said, the having that drop down and
mm,
on mobile specifically, because
yeah,
like you're having this big fat thing we call a
yeah,
finger, and trying
yeah,
to press that on a screen,
yeah,
and you're trying to do your date of birth or something out like that, and you're getting frustrated and
yeah,
not able to submit that. I mean, I've checked these things on user recordings of people,
yeah,
getting frustrated and abandoning, or they're just trying to they're just moving around because they're a bit frustrated or
yeah.
confused.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
very common, very common. And I suppose then moving on from that, that obviously takes you to where your issues are. Okay, well, how do we see, issues being fixed? Some of the common, say, things that might work, certainly, I say, worth testing. Well, the biggest consistent one we see to improve a form's performance is validation of error messages, and specifically inline validation.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is obviously you show the error message at the right time for the user, so they get the feedback pretty much as soon as possible. So typically the best time for that is after they finish typing in, when they move from one field to the next. So they refocus from field 1, they go to field 2. You give them the feedback on field 1 straight away, so they get the error message almost immediately. Obviously, you don't want to give them the error message too early, because we've all been that when we're typing our phone number into a form and it says, no, it's not enough digits. Like, yeah, I've not finished yet.
It's
that
like, whoa, whoa,
gets
whoa,
annoying.
whoa. Yeah. Or the credit
Yeah.
card one, it's like, you need to enter your credit. Like, I'm like, dude, just, I know I've put like the date, I know I've put the expiry date in, but just let me do that first and I'll put a credit card number in.
Yeah, exactly. Those sort of things were annoying. So basically, you do it once you
Yeah.
move from one field to the next. And we've seen, I mean, there's sort of a famous study in the field that was done. It was probably about 10 years ago now that
Yeah.
on average showed a 22% uplift in conversion from if you had no validation through to inline validation. And it's such a big thing because forms can be stressful places. And the more times you show, we've all been, spent 10 minutes, filled out a form, click
Yeah.
submit, and then suddenly a field of red and you don't know where it is. Well, where's the red? Are you scrolling up? And, they don't tell you and they've got what the problems are right at the top of the
Yeah.
form. And then you got to go to the top and go, okay, that's which field? And then you got to go back to the middle and try and find it. And you go back and say, okay, well, what was the problem? I don't know. I'm going to go back to the top. And, those sort of things, they're horrendous for form experience. And you will see a lot of abandonment with that. So, yeah, if you can tell people the issue straight away, or even if it's done, it works really well for, the big green tick. You've done that. It's like, yeah, okay. So it helps, that's mental state of mind. There's no stress. I know it's correct. I know it's going to be accepted. There's no stress of pressing the submit button. So
Sort of
both,
feels like high school, you're an exam, you
yeah,
got a harsh teacher,
yeah,
cross,
yeah,
or, oh,
exactly.
you've done well, okay, big tick. So,
I think
sort of, I could just playing on that psychology.
exactly. I think there is some deep-seated psychological need there. The red, it's like it brings back bad memories. So, we consistently see, that as one of the biggest drivers of an improved conversion rate for forms. So it's certainly something you should test out if you're not doing it on your forms already.
And would you
So,
say, oh, sorry to interrupt.
no,
You mentioned mobile. Would you say that that's another sort of mobile optimized forms, which a single column is probably one of the other
yeah,
sort of
yeah,
things from an 80-20 perspective to get
yeah,
results
yeah,
from?
definitely. Obviously, it depends. Well, as with all of these, it depends how bad your form is to start with.
Yeah.
But yes, and it depends. Mobile is probably slightly more dependent on your audience because uh, if you're B2B, then often you get a lot less mobile traffic compared to desktop. But in general, yes, you make sure you go through, you test it for user experience, you look at how you're flowing through, and consider almost having a completely separate mobile experience. There's lots of design tips that you can do that are out there. We've got some in our let's like plug for our ebook, which is or we've got an ebook on our website which has got all this sort of, a lot of those tips in there. So I
I
won't
read
go through
that.
them all
It took
now.
hours to
Yeah,
go through it. I felt like I was reading someone's master's thesis. I mean, very,
yeah,
very good, very comprehensive. Like it's
yeah,
helped me out a lot as a
yeah,
CRO.
yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah, it's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah, so there's lots of those because most of those in when you look at each of them, they're probably small in themselves, but once you add them together, you just create a much better mobile experience
mm.
for your users. So yeah, definitely. I suppose that in a way that should be a hygiene factor. Testing on mobile before you put it out, you get your QAs to make sure that works and interact and use best. Use cut down on things like drop downs and or at least make sure it's searchable, and there's lots of stuff like that you can do.
And
And then
and and oh, sorry, just to the going back for our audience so they can know, specifically form validation, there's sort of two ways you can go about it. There's negative and positive. So,
Mhm.
do you just want to tell our audience the reasons why positive validation is generally better than negative?
You're talking about in terms of the error messaging,
Yeah, like it says, like, oh, you've done something bad,
yeah,
as
exactly. Yeah,
opposed to like, oh, you could please enter your credit card in this
yeah.
format, blah blah
No,
blah.
absolutely. Yeah, it is. If you start with a language which is either accusatory or just
Yeah.
or unclear, just like computer says no, big red cross, and you don't explain, it's much better to have a friendly error message saying, "Oh, you've done that. Have you missed out the at?" Or going a step further, if people put in Gmail instead of Gmail, you might say, "Okay, did you mean you know Jim at gmail.com?" And so building that sort of positive validation and error messaging is critical, just because I say, like, filling out forms is stressful.
Mm,
So if you can make it as easy as possible, make it friendly, it's partially about brand tone as well. You can go a little, if you've got a slightly quirky brand tone, you can build that into your messages, and that helps reinforce it, your brand. But obviously the crucial thing is to tell people how to fix something.
yeah.
Is it because you know phone numbers being a particularly bad one, and that okay, we don't accept zero spaces. Ideally you should pretty much accept anything, but let's assume that you can't, for some reason you can't change your back end, but at least you then need to be helpful with the error messages, like, oh, please add the plus 31 or the plus 44, whatever your country code is, those sort of things that you need to be um, talking about, and just telling people what to do to fix it. And again, you should, in theory, see a decent uplift or decent decrease in people abandoning on that particular question.
That's a good point. And is there any other tips and advice you'd give to people?
Yeah, no, probably one more big one is just about explaining why you need information. So
Yeah.
it's a big one. We see phone number fields typically is the worst for this, but sometimes even email you get that. If you're not telling people why you need information, you'll see them dropping out. And so, as I say, phone number fields, we see it quite a lot on our forms. If you don't explain why you need a phone number field, then people assume the worst. Particularly in e-commerce, to be like, hey,
Like you're gonna spam them
yeah,
or
exactly. Or a sales call. So like, it's like, what,
yeah.
I'm buying something from you online. You've got my physical address. You've got my email address. Why do you need my phone number? But if we've seen it in cases where they just explain that we'll only use this if there's an issue with delivery, or we'll use
Yeah.
this to send you a text when your parcel's on the way. Then people are much more likely to give that information and not drop out. So it's just a small piece of microcopy.
So
8 words.
microcopy. What about? So do you think it's Do you see clients use this? I guess you see this used in different ways. They can put the
Yeah.
microcopy underneath the form, or they could have that little whatever the technical word is. That little eye with
Yeah,
the
you can
round
click on
circle. You
it.
press that, and a little modal
Gives you
pops up.
the, yeah, depending on
Yeah.
how technically complex or whatever the answer may be. So yeah, definitely you can see it used. Again, you can use it for brand voice, but just explaining why you need something, why it's important, what it is, if it's unclear, just a little bit. So sometimes when you're trying to put in an overseas bank account or what have you, it's like, what do you need to put in? What do you not put in? Like VAT. Just when you get technical about VAT numbers, do you need the country code, phone numbers, those sort of things that
Mm,
just add to just the smoothness of it. So the user is absolutely clear what they need to provide, and so you'll see just small things like that can improve user experience and
mm.
your metrics, in quite a big way.
Yeah. So I guess the bullet point for that is really just providing clarity from a
Yeah,
CRO perspective.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and look, what's some of the common myths that you find with
Mm.
form optimization and design?
So the biggest one, probably by far, is the fact that just chopping out form fields will improve conversion rate.
Yeah.
So it's almost become an axiom that actually, reduce the number of form fields, your conversion rate will go up. That may or may not be true. I'm not saying it isn't true. It can be true if you do it the right way, but it's not automatically a given. Long forms don't necessarily have poor conversion rates. There's a lot of factors at play, and so I always quote, like, we've got a lot of benchmarking data, and it's on our website about different sectors, and the biggest converting sector on average for their forms is local government.
Oh, whoa.
But yeah,
With
but
local government, the
yeah,
most boring
yeah,
kind of bureaucratic place on earth.
exactly. But they also have the longest forms on average. There's probably about 70 inputs if you include all the different buttons you've got to click. And yet they still have the highest conversion rate. And is it because they've got brilliant forms? Well, not really. They're still as bad as any others. It's just the fact there's more motivation at play there. Typically,
Yeah.
local governments have monopolies on services. So if you want to make a planning application, what you're going to do? You're not going to go somewhere else, are you? Because you can't. So people are forced to go through and complete the form. So they've got high conversion rates. So it just goes to show that it's not always about cutting the form fields down. Now, that said, obviously, it can be important to cut the form fields down sometimes. If you absolutely don't need to ask something, removing it will probably improve your conversion rate. But there's lots of studies out there that cutting form fields out can sometimes reduce your conversion rate if you're not asking things that people are expecting you to ask. If you're applying for a mortgage and you don't ask some financial questions, there might be a bit, hang on, are these guys genuine? Or also, if you cut things out that are critical for qualification, you might get high conversion rate, but you'll get a load of rubbish at the end if you're trying to
Yeah.
get leads. So actually, you probably need to have that barrier in and a lower conversion rate, but you filter out stuff that's not going to waste your sales team's time. So it's never a given. But as I say, sometimes people just think, oh, we'll just chop it down and that'll be fine. So that's probably the biggest myth about form optimization.
Yeah, it reminds me of the myth that having and there was some debate about this some time ago that long form versus short form landing pages,
Yeah,
and it just because you've got a short form landing page, i.e., cutting the landing page in half and reducing the copy, it's not always going to like double your conversions or
yeah,
whatever. Like,
hmm
you really just got to test it out at the end of the
yeah,
day. Because sometimes people may prefer a long form landing page because it explains more about the product
yeah,
or service.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, definitely, it is critical to test and learn on those.
Are there any other sort of myths that you find in this
Um,
dark art?
this one's not so much a myth because generally it's true, but it's an interesting one. When you're looking at multi-step versus single-step forms.
Yeah,
Um, so generally, and pretty much in virtually every test we've seen done, multi-step forms perform better.
yeah.
Um, But actually, speaking to some CRO agencies last week, and actually they had examples where it didn't perform better. So actually, it's
Mm,
probably, even though in most cases, I would say if you've got any sort of complex form, test a multi-step form.
yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean that's true. So again, it's more about you need to make sure you're testing it. I do have an interesting one test that's going to be coming up, hopefully, which has got a mortgage form on one page. Now
Mm-hmm.
it's a nicely visually designed page, but actually, typically we would always say you got a mortgage form, you probably got 4 or 5 discrete sections. You should probably break those up and put them into multiple steps for the user. But at the moment they don't. So I'm looking forward to seeing the test for that one. Actually, could a single page mortgage form, if it's well designed enough, do as well as a multi-step form? I mean, the issue often is the single page forms are badly designed. They are just import the paper, the paper form online, and you see that particularly with American banks for some reason. I think they've because American banks are less digitally sophisticated than elsewhere in the world. They do a lot of in branch and they still do a lot of paper, so they've not spent the time on
Okay.
their digital stuff.
Still, but Yeah, stuck in the 90s. In terms of form optimization and its role in feeding data into analytics,
Mm-hmm.
how does your sort of platform Zuko provide users that data?
So, well, our sales, obviously, if you were to use Zuko, you would install a couple of tags on your form.
Yeah,
That would then track the anonymized behavioral data. And so you can see, how many people are there, how many people are dropping out, where they're dropping out, what their behavior is like. You can dig down, you can segment the audience. Depending on how you set it up, you could segment by traffic source, by product, by A/B test, however you want to do that. And it manifests itself in various different dashboard reports, ones that you can build yourself and ones that are standard ones. So you can see where the problem areas are. You can also use our API to push it into other reporting systems. We've got a direct connection with Google Data Studios. So, some clients like to put it so they've got all their data in one place if they're pulling data from multiple analytics sources, if they are using Google Analytics or others. So you can do that and manifest itself. But I suppose to your point, I guess it is, to us at least, it's certainly critical that you do have some sort of data, however, whether that's Zuko or with someone else on your forms.
yeah.
It's, make sure you know the specifics. Don't just have a black box. Make sure you know exactly what's going on within each element of your form and where people are struggling, because otherwise you'll be flying blind.
What are some for users who are new to um, form design and analytics? What are some sort of basic sort of analytics that they should be aware of when it comes to optimizing their form and improving conversions?
Um, so in terms of forms, as I mentioned, you're looking at analytics before. So you look around the submit button. That's obviously, if you have analytics around
Yeah,
that gives you that. Other things you need, probably the base segmentations we are always look at are firstly between users who complete and users who abandon, because
yeah,
often that's where you'll get your insights. So you can see if there's a difference in a metric, say, for example, corrections, or for abandoners compared to people who complete. You can see, okay, people who struggle go back to the phone number field and then they abandon. They go back 5 times and abandon. And just by breaking that out, you can see, okay, some people don't struggle. They go through. These guys, obviously, there's a struggle on here and it's related to abandonment. So I'd segment by that as well. And then the other common one is mobile versus desktop, which we kind of
yeah,
talked about before, because that really will surface. And if you can do it on a field level basis, like you can in Zuko, you can just look side by side and say, what's the abandonment rate for on the, I keep you saying phone number, but it's easy to say. So the phone number field, is that
yeah.
different, significantly different for mobile users versus desktop users? And if it is, then okay, there's a potential issue there, or is it to do? Then you would then put that side by side with your form to create those hypotheses. Is it to do with our error messaging? Is it to do with our validation? Is it to do with the mobile UI? Those sort of things. So that's probably the places you can start, and obviously you can dig a lot deeper. If you're tracking your traffic source, you can see if certain traffic sources behave differently to others.
So paid versus organic or
Yeah, for
social.
example, yeah,
Yeah.
classic, which, yeah, certainly organic versus paid, you often see a much different
Mm.
system. And also you can see where they drop out. So often what we'll see is, if you look at your data in aggregate, you'll see, okay, people get halfway through the form and then drop out. But then if you look at your paid versus organic, you might see people that become paid drop out after 10 seconds, and people on organic, if they drop out a lot later on. So they've got two different issues there. You've got issues of traffic either being put off immediately by an intimidating form, or they were just never in the market anyway. So that
Mm.
feeds into your advertising that's driving them there. Or if they're spending a lot of time on and then dropping out, you're like, okay, they're obviously investing the time. So actually it's an issue with the form. These are people that seemingly want to convert, but they're
Yeah.
not for some reason. So we need to dig deeper exactly where the issues are.
And I would also be curious about new versus returning users.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I do know some forms obviously have the save button.
Yeah.
Can Zuko record stats for new versus return users?
Yes. Yeah. That's one of our standard segmentations as well. Yeah. So you're right. So you will often see if it's a complex form, your returning users will obviously convert at a much higher rate.
Yeah.
And so you can see that, and you can kind of track how they go. They jump on, they go to stage 2, and then they'll come back later and return. And sometimes that's driven by silly things like form timeouts as well. You know, if you see it sometimes, financial forms, you're asking for someone's passport, they run away, they get it, they get timed out. Well, okay.
Oh, bugger.
So
So like I'm on page 5 and I've got to, didn't save it.
Then they'll return as well. Yeah. So then they return
Yeah.
as well. Although sometimes obviously people will go away and if it's a important decision, they won't commit straight away. Sometimes you'll see returning users, they just come back. You see they've just clicked on complete because all they're doing is reviewing what they've done and then come back next day. Say, okay, I'm ready to commit to a mortgage application or whatever it may be.
That's very interesting. And yes, so look, let's round it up. I mean, we've talked about why form design or form analytics is really important. We've talked about some of the best practices or things you should head out the gate running, some of the common myths, and also ways we can use analytics or have an understanding about analytics as a sort of baseline for form optimization. Look, it's been really good talking to you, Alan, on the podcast.
Yeah.
Where can our users get in contact with you?
LinkedIn, generally the best. I'm
Yep.
on LinkedIn a lot, or just Alun, ALUN at Zuko.io. Feel free to push any emails there. They're the 2 best ways to get hold of me.
Awesome. So thanks for coming once again.
It's been a pleasure. Bye.